Yo, what's up guys? My name's Anthony. Welcome to my brand new channel, Tie One On. Alright, so this channel is mainly going to revolve around jig tying. I got into tying jigs about a year ago and I fell in love with it. So if some of you guys out there are just getting into it, hopefully I could help you out. I might not be as skilled as some of the other guys out there, but you know, I'm practicing and getting better and tying new types of patterns. So as I learn things, I'll share with you some of the mistakes that I made and you know, some of the tricks that I learned along the way. I've learned so much so far in the past year, so it's really definitely a good hobby to get into, especially if you're into throwing jigs. You could save a couple bucks by tying your own jigs. And also, you know, every jig out there on the market is a little bit different. So if you tie your own jigs, you could put exactly what you want into each jig. Alright, even beyond that, we might get into making some other lures like chatterbaits, spinner baits. I plan on scratching the surface of pouring soft plastics down the road, so as I get into that, I'll take you guys along with me for that. And then from time to time on the channel, I also do tournament kayak fishing, so we'll get out there and we'll show some of these jigs in action on the water. Alright, so if you guys are interested in that, if you could go down below, hit the subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. I plan on uploading about once a week, so if you guys could also hit the bell notification, and then every time I upload a video, you guys will get notified. Alright guys, so tonight for the first video to kick off the channel, we're going to start off nice and slow. We're going to go over some of the basic necessities that you need to tie a simple jig, and then we're going to tie up this little 1/4 ounce finesse Arkie style jig. It's a little 1/4 ounce jig with a 2/0 stout hook. This is a great jig. I've caught a ton of fish on this jig. You could do everything with it. You could flip it, you could pitch it, skip it on the docks, you could swim it. I mean, this little jig does everything, and it gets a lot of bites because it's so small and compact. So we're going to tie one of these up with a green pumpkin and chartreuse skirt on it. So it's a real simple tie. So we're going to start off nice and slow with the channel with a simple tie, and then as we get a little further into the videos, we'll start tying a little bit more complex jigs. Alright, so first off, let's get into some of the stuff that we need to tie a jig. So the first thing you're going to need to tie a jig is a jig. So basically what I have here is a little 1/4 ounce finesse Arkie style jig. There's two things you could do. You could either buy jigs that are pre-poured, or you could pour your own. I have a shop down in my garage. I actually poured this jig myself and painted it myself. So in later videos, we'll get into that. We'll go down to the garage and in the shop, and we'll pour some jigs, and I'll show you guys how I paint them. But for now, this is the first thing you're going to need. Obviously, is a jig, and then this jig has a weed guard. So you can see the hole in there needs a weed guard. So the next thing you'll need is a weed guard to put in the jig. I use basically two colors most of the time, black or white. I use black for my darker colored jigs and white for like my light color, like sexy shad style jigs. But they come in a multitude of colors, so you could get green pumpkin, you could get brown, you get red. I mean, if you go to barlowstackle.com, they have every style of weed guard that you could think of in any color that you want. Next thing we're going to need, okay, so we got our jig, we got our weed guard, so that's the materials we're going to need to make the jig, and we'll also need our skirt material. So here's the skirt we're going to tie tonight. This is basically a frog style skirt. It's a very thin skirt, and it's a green pumpkin chartreuse pattern. So actually I got this off of fishingskirts.com, and if you guys want to actually pick this very skirt up, it's number 119. So if you go to fishingskirts.com, go to the search column, type in number 119, this skirt will come up. Alright, so we got our jig, we got our weed guard, we got our skirt. Okay, so now next thing we're going to need is a vise. This is a Peak rotary vise. It's called the Jurassic vise. I did a lot of research. This is actually the second vise that I owned. I owned a much smaller vise than this, and I just had a lot of problems with it. This is a little pricey, but it's worth it. It's about 150 bucks, but this is a good solid vise. It's smooth as butter, and it has a rotary function to it. So we're tying some jigs, you need that rotary function, you know, where you want to wrap certain materials on. But we'll get into that in later videos. I actually want to do a whole video down the road on this vise and as to why I upgraded to it. So, but for now, let's just say we're going to need a vise. So you got your jig, you got your vise, you got your material. So now we got to put the material on the jig. So in order to do that, we're going to need thread to tie the jig. So the main thread that I use 99% of the time is Danville 210 Denier flat wax nylon thread. This seems to be the standard for most jig tiers out there. It's a good thread, it's probably the best out there. 210 Denier is the strength of the thread. It's the thickness and the strength. It's a very thin thread, but it's a very strong thread, and it's got a wax finish on it. So when you wrap it on itself, it kind of binds down to itself, and it gives a real good hold. So I've never had any real issues with it, and you know, it ties the material up really good. I usually use two colors 90% of the time, either black or white. And then so what I have next to put the thread on the jig is you're going to need a bobbin. So I like to carry two bobbins. I like to carry one from my black thread and one from my white thread, because I had one bobbin and then switching back and forth is just a pain in the butt. So I picked up a second one. So I keep one for white thread and one for black thread. And basically what the bobbin does, this bobbin is pretty cool because it's got a little rotary thing on the side, and I could adjust the tension. It's basically like a drag on a reel, and I could adjust the tension as to how the line comes out of you know, the thread comes out of the bobbin. And you want a little tension when you're tying because you want to be able to, you know, cinch down, so this way the thread holds. So the thread goes on the bobbin, goes up through the bobbin, and comes out of this hole, and then you kind of wrap. So we'll show you when we get down to the vise how all that works. Next thing you're going to need is a good pair of scissors. I picked these up from Field and Stream. They're really good scissors. They're super sharp, and they come to a needle sharp point. That's key when tying jigs, because sometimes you have material in the way and you really need to get in there to cut the thread, and having that come to that needle sharp point will help you get in there and make a nice accurate cut on your thread, and so you're cutting your thread and not your material, or vice versa. Once the jig's all tied up, next thing we're going to do is seal the threads. So even though the flat wax nylon thread does a good job of binding to itself, you still want to seal it. So most of the time what I use is this. It's basically a clear nail polish. It's called Sally Hansen's Tough as Nails. And basically I put this on afterwards and let it dry. When it dries hard as a rock. So it's almost like having super glue on there. And it's definitely going to keep any of the thread from coming undone, so the jig will last a long time. Last thing we're going to need is some super glue. This is a Loctite super glue. It's the Ultra Gel Control, so it's a little thicker than regular super glue. And what I like about this is it has the two handles on the side, so you squeeze this and you can really control how much comes out. And so what I like to do with this is I use this to put the weed guard in. So I put a little bit, you know, in the hole of the jig, and I put the weed guard in there, let it sit for about a couple minutes, and it dries solid. So, all right, so that's basically everything we're going to need for tonight to tie this jig. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom in a little bit onto the jig, onto the vise itself. We're going to put the jig in the vise, and then we're going to tie it up. Alright guys, so now that we're on the vise, I'm going to actually show you guys real quick one of the reasons why I love this vise so much. So standard jig tying vices usually have a clamp that opens up and clamps down onto the hook, and they do a pretty good job of holding it, but this has a different feature. This has a sliding mechanism, and what you do is you loosen this up, you slide the mechanism up, you put the hook through, and then you tighten this up. And when you tighten this up, it clamps down on the jig so hard I could literally lift the vise up by the jig right now. And that's what I love. It gives you a nice solid hold while you're tying. Alright, so let's start tying this jig up. Okay, so basically the first thing you do when you first start tying a jig is you want to start with a base. So I like to take the thread, I like to wrap it around the jig, couple times. And then I like to take the thread and pull it over, and then I like to wrap a couple more times around to trap it. Once I get a few wraps, that tag end that I just wrapped over, we're going to cut that off. And this is usually how I start the base for most of my jigs. So I got a good solid 8 to 10 wraps on there. We don't want to make it too thick because we don't want to build it up too much because we got to put the skirt material on. But basically, you know, that's how I start most of my jigs. All right, so now we're going to put the skirt on. All right, guys, so here's the material we're going to use tonight. This is the skirt. A little better look at it. Again, I put a link in the description below as to where you could purchase this color. Alright, so let's tie it on. Alright, so now that we got our base on, I like to come over and I like to, what I do is I'll grab and pinch the skirt material here because I want to keep this on the top of the jig, and then I'll make a wrap or two and then I'll fold it over, and I want it to be even. So with the back of the jig, I want when I pull this skirt material back, I want the tabs to match up, and they match up pretty good on the back, so I know that I got the right length for my jig, and I got it in the right section. So now that I have it in the right area, I'm going to work the material around the jig a little bit so it's even, and I like to do half and half. So I'm going to work the jig around the top half of the material right now, the material around the top half of the jig, sorry about that, right now. And once I get it where I want it, I'm going to pull it and I'm going to start making a base. So I like to put a few wraps around, and that's good. So now that'll hold it in place. And then what I like to do is I'd like to just give a little tug down a little bit, and that'll really seal it. Okay, so now I'm going to take another half a tab. So I'm going to take this tab and I'm going to find the middle point, which is right here, and I'm going to pull it in half. Okay, now I got my two halves. I'm going to put another half on the top here just to make it a little thicker because this is a frog skirt. And so now once I got my length there, let me move the vise over a little bit. Once I got my length there, I like to pull the skirt out, and I'll put the tabs together so that they're even, and then I'll pull it back, I'll lay it over here, and now that I know when they're even, I'll hold it, and then I'll make a couple wraps. And then I'm going to spread this material out a little bit so it's nice and even on both sides around the jig. And that looks pretty good. And now we're going to make a couple wraps to hold it in place. I try to start building a base, and I try to follow that base all the way through. So I got a certain width that I want to keep it. And again, on that last one, I like to give it a little tug down to cinch it in place. So now we got the top of the jig done. I'm going to rotate my vise over to the bottom, and then we're going to grab another false tab. Here we go. Okay, and the same thing, I like to pull the material out nice and straight. I like to match the tab up, pull it back, that's about right, and then make a couple more wraps to hold it. Probably about 3 is good. And then again, now I want to work my material around so it's nice and even going around the jig. So takes a little bit of playing, but I want the material to come around and meet up with the material on the other side of the jig here. So as you can see, I want the material to meet up on either side with the material that I already put on the top. That looks pretty good. Come around and pull this way. Okay, good. That looks like we got pretty good coverage all the way around. Good. And now what we're going to do is that other half a tab, we're going to take that, we're going to pull the skirt material out again, match up our tab ends, pull it nice and even, and then we're gonna wrap 1, 2, and then we'll work our material around. And it's okay to take your time with this, especially in the beginning. You want to get your material nice and even. Okay. Alright, now that looks like pretty good coverage. Alright, so another thing I like to use, let me grab one of these when I'm tying. I got these from the hardware store. Some guys steal their wife's hair clips to do this. I got these from the hardware store. I'll find these again and I'll put a link down below in another video. They're just basically bendy pieces of rubber, and I like to use these because I'll pull the skirt material and I'll take this and I'll wrap it around, and that kind of holds it out of the way. And same thing, especially with the back one. I'll take another one, I'll pull the material back, I'll take this and I'll wrap it around and keep it out of my way. And these do a really good job of keeping the material out of the way. So now I could make nice wraps without the material hanging down in the way. Again, I'm going to find my base that I already started underneath and just keep following that around. And we're just going to keep wrapping. And we're going to, you know, pull down pretty tight. You don't want to pull down too hard. I mean, it is a thread, so it will break. But you want to put a little pressure on it to make it nice and tight. And we'll just keep wrapping, make a nice solid base. That looks pretty good. And so now what I like to do, some guys use a tool to do this called the whip finishing tool. I learned how to do this by hand, and it just seems to be easier. So what I do is I take my 2 fingers, I put it in the thread, I hold the bobbin to the side, and I do a 1/4 turn, and that kind of makes a loop. Let me back the vise up a little bit so you guys can see. Okay, here we go. So 2 fingers, I hold the bobbin to the side. Here, let me bring this up a little bit. Okay, bobbin to the side, 2 fingers. I do a 1/4 turn, and then I wrap 1. And each time I come around, I do a 1/4 turn. 2, another 1/4 turn. 3, another turn. 4, another turn. 5. And see, now I have this loop here on my finger. So what I do is I grab it and I pull the bobbin back and I guide it in nice and tight, cinch it down again, and that's called the whip finish. I like to do 2 of those. So that's 1, again, 2 fingers, bobbin to the side, 1/4 turn. Now I'm going to wrap 1, turn again, 2, wrap, turn again, 3. Each time I'm coming up, twisting my fingers, and I'm bringing this piece of thread over the top. Down, come back, twist my fingers, bring this piece of thread over the top. I like to do it 5 or 6 times. So let's say that's 4, 5, that's good. And so now, even though I did all those wraps, you still have room to pull this thread out. I can make this loop as big as I want it, or I can pull the bobbin and pull it down nice and tight. Once you pull it nice and tight, it cinches down. Now that we did 2 whip finishes, we're going to cut the thread. Okay, good. So that's got a good solid, that'll probably never come undone. It's got 2 good solid tight cinches on it. But just to be on the safe side, what we're going to do now is we're going to take our clear nail polish, Sally Hansen's. And we don't need a lot. We're just going to open it up. You know, get off the excess. I'm sure we've all seen our wife paint their fingernails, or girlfriends or whatever. So we get off all the excess. And we find the threads. We want to stay as neat as possible. So this is why I like to use the rotary function of the vise. And I just put a little on, kind of just barely brushing it on. I like to rotate the vise all the way around. Make sure I get good coverage. And there we go. Now that will dry and it will seal hard as a rock. So there's no way those threads are going to come undone. Alright, so next what I like to do is I'm going to take off these pieces of rubber. Get these off, sorry. I don't want to touch the nail polish. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the middle, and we're going to open this up so we could put our weed guard in. So I just want to expose the hole in the top of the jig so we could put in our weed guard. So here's our weed guard here. Here it is right here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of that super glue. I like to take the super glue. I like to put, see if I can get the camera to focus. I like to put a little dab on here. That's it. And I like to go in here and just do a little squeeze so it just comes out. Good. Okay, so now we'll take this. We'll set it in there. Make sure we don't get any overspilling. Okay. Good. So now our weed guard's set in there, and we'll let that dry up for a minute. While that's drying, the next order of business is to cut our tabs. So at the end of each one, you have this straight piece, and then there's a little area where it starts turning into, you know, the different tabs. So I just basically take it and I just cut the ends off. So we'll cut this one. You can cut each of the tabs. Don't forget, we got our little half tab here that we got to cut. Make sure these come apart. Good. Sometimes if you don't cut the tab deep enough, they'll still stick together at the tips. So just make sure you cut it down deep enough, and then it'll come right off. Cut this one. As you can see, the jig's starting to come to life. There we go. We got two more. Got this guy. And then we got this one here. Okay. And that's it, guys. Here we go. Let's take it out of the vise. Now again, I'll obviously put a trailer on here, and I will probably end up cutting that weed guard down because it's way too long. I like bringing the weed guard down. Actually, let's do it. Yeah. So in order to cut the weed guard, I like to bring the weed guard down right to the barb of the hook, which is right about there. I like to mark it with my finger, and then I'll take the scissors and I will cut the weed guard straight across so that it's even with the end. Sometimes it's a pain to cut these. Make sure you cut it nice and even. Like that. I like cutting it on a little bit of an angle, and as you can see now, the weed guard's much better. And there's our jig right there. Let's open up these tabs a little bit. Sometimes you gotta pull these down a little bit to play with it, get these to open up. And there we go, guys. 1/4 ounce finesse Arkie style jig with a green pumpkin chartreuse skirt. I get bit on this thing like crazy. This is a good jig. Again, I'll probably trim the skirt down a little bit because I like using my favorite trailer to use with this is the Strike King Rage Chunk trailer. So what I'll do in order to, you know, keep from hindering the action of the trailer is I'll put the trailer on and then I'll cut the skirt, you know, so this way it doesn't hinder the action of the trailer. There it is, guys. It's our first jig. Again, thank you guys for watching the first video of the channel. If you like what you've seen, please again hit the subscribe button and the bell notification, and once I make my next video, you guys will get notified. Alright, thank you so much for watching.